He thought power meant money, status, and the right to humiliate the woman who loved him. But when Mina's true identity is revealed, the empire he built begins to crumble. This story reminds us. Respect is worth more than wealth, and betrayal always has a price. Thanks for watching. Please support the channel with 1 like and 1 share, so we can keep creating more emotional stories.
He was the classic Wall Street shark, a man who saw his wife as nothing more than a shiny accessory to flaunt at high society events. He paraded his various flings, mocked her at every opportunity, and frequently called her a burden, all while his entire empire teetered on a shaky foundation of debt and lies. He constantly threatened to leave her with nothing if she ever dared to step out of line. Yet he never once suspected that his quiet, unassuming wife was actually the sole hidden heir to a sprawling global fortune that made his own assets look like pocket change. Then she made a single phone call. This is the story of how a man's overwhelming arrogance triggered his own total destruction, orchestrated entirely by the woman he had never taken the time to truly know. The charity gala was heavy with the suffocating scent of expensive cologne and designer perfume. To the other guests, it was just another night of networking and champagne. To Mina, however, the ballroom was a battlefield, where she was finally preparing to launch her strategic strike against the man who had spent years trying to diminish her. Damian Blackwood, the ambitious founder of Ares Capital, prowled through the crowded room like a predator, his face fixed in a practiced, predatory smile. On his arm, Mina Blackwood looked effortlessly elegant in a midnight navy blue gown. It was a custom-piece hand-stitched in Paris that cost more than a high-end luxury car. Though Damian rarely noticed anything that did not directly serve his ego, she moved with a quiet, regal grace that contrasted sharply with the chaotic, desperate energy radiating from the man beside her. The elegance was subtle, but to Damian, that quiet confidence was merely a weakness. "Mina, try to look interesting for once," he muttered through gritted teeth, his fingers digging into her arm with painful intensity. "Steven Schwartzman is watching us right now. I am working the sterling deal. I need a winner standing by my side. Not a librarian who looks like she would rather be reading a book in the corner." He glanced around the room, constantly hunting for people who could inflate his ego or help him secure his next massive financial gamble. Mina offered him a forced, polite smile that did not reach her eyes. "Of course, Damian, I was just appreciating the artwork on the wall." "Forget it," he snapped, abruptly letting go of her arm as his gaze drifted. Serafina." Damian instantly dismissed Mina, turning his 1,000-watt, synthetic charm towards Serafina Roth, a prominent heiress known for her sharp reputation, her massive inheritance, and a dress that left very little to the imagination. He leaned in, his entire posture shifting to accommodate his new target. "Damian, darling, how absolutely wonderful to see you," Serafina purred, air-kissing his cheeks while pointedly ignoring Mina entirely. "I heard through the grapevine that you are finally making moves on the sterling acquisition. How incredibly exciting for you." "You know me better than that, Serafina," Damian boasted, his chest puffing out with artificial pride. "I do not just knock on doors. I take the hinges," he declared with a laugh. His hand rested firmly on her back, a lingering, disrespectful gesture that made Mina's stomach turn in disgust. Mina stood still as a ghost at her husband's side, observing the scene with a cold, detached clarity. This had been her life for 3 long years. They met when she was working at a small, independent gallery in the heart of Soho. Back then, she used her maiden name, Vance, hiding the fact that her family owned a massive, international empire. She was just Mina, the quiet girl with a sad smile, and she had hoped that staying out of the spotlight would allow her to find a love that was genuine and untainted by her family name. He had fallen for her simplicity initially, believing it was a refreshing break from the greedy gold diggers who usually swarmed his circle. Now, he deeply resented that same simplicity. He had absolutely no idea that her low profile was actually a protective wall she had built around herself. She had intentionally fled her own world, desperate to escape the shallow sycophants and the crushing, suffocating weight of the Vance family legacy. only to fall into a trap that was even worse than the one she had tried so hard to leave behind. She had wanted to be loved for who she was inside, but she had chosen the wrong man for that dream. As Damien and Serafina continued to laugh loudly, Mina noticed Damien's chief financial officer, Martin, weaving his way through the crowd toward them. Martin looked visibly pale, his hands trembling slightly as he clutched a glass of water. "Damien," he whispered urgently, ignoring the presence of the other guests. "We have a major problem, a serious one. I need you to step away and look at these files immediately." "A big one, you say?" Damien's bright smile faded into a mask of pure annoyance. "Not now. Martin, can you not see that I am in the middle of a conversation?" "It is J.P. Morgan," Martin whispered, his voice cracking under the pressure. "They are moving to freeze our entire corporate credit line, and that $2 billion commitment we were promised from the Carlyle Group for the Sterling deal. It is officially on hold, indefinitely." The words hung in the air like a death sentence, causing the color to drain rapidly from Damien's face. Damien's face turned an ashen, sickly shade of white. "What? Who told you that?" "I do not know," Martin stammered, looking around frantically as if the walls were listening. "The call came from the very top of the bank. They cited sudden market volatility as the primary reason. It makes absolutely no sense. The market is perfectly fine today." Mina watched her husband from the sidelines, feeling a grim sense of satisfaction. She saw the heavy sweat forming on his brow and his knuckles turning white as he gripped his champagne glass. He was dangerously overleveraged, and he knew it. Ares Capital was a predatory firm that required constant, massive fuel to keep the machine running. If the deal failed and his credit was pulled by the lenders, his fragile house of cards would crumble into dust overnight. He spun around to face Mina, his eyes freezing over with pure, unadulterated coldness. "This is your fault," he hissed, his voice low and venomous. Mina blinked, feigning confusion as she looked at him. "What? How could this possibly be my fault?" "That charity lunch you hosted yesterday for the animal shelter," he sneered, his lip curling in disgust. "It makes me look soft, like I am wasting time on trivial matters. People are whispering, 'Mina.' They see weakness," Mina gasped, stunned by his twisted logic. "That lunch raised over $1 million for the charity. Damien, it was a massive success." "That is insane," he snapped, cutting her off, before immediately turning back to Serafina with a fake, plastered-on grin. "Go mingle with the guests," he barked, not even looking at her anymore. "Talk to some other man's wife. Just try to look useful for once." He turned his back on her entirely, resuming his flirtatious chat with Serafina as if nothing had just happened. Mina stood there alone, ignored and discarded. He had humiliated her in front of everyone, blamed her for his own financial failings, and completely disregarded her presence. For 3 years, she had endured his cruelty for the sake of the life she thought she wanted. But that was over. He had openly flaunted his mistress right in front of her face, thinking she was too weak to ever walk away. She had kept every one of her marriage vows, while he had systematically broken every single one of them. She calmly set her half-empty glass on a passing tray, her movements deliberate and controlled. The fear she had once felt for his temper had completely evaporated, replaced by a cold, calculating resolve that she had inherited from her father's side of the family. She walked past the extravagant art displays and the chattering guests. Finding a small, quiet spot tucked away near a marble Greek statue, she pulled out a simple encrypted phone that he had never seen before and dialed a single number saved simply as home. It rang exactly once before it was picked up. "Hello." The voice on the other end was deep, gravelly, and carried the heavy, undeniable weight of old money and absolute authority. "Dad," Mina said, her voice turning into cold, sharp steel. "It is me, Mina. Are you all right? It is very late." The man replied with concern. "I am fine," she said, watching her husband laugh carelessly with Serafina across the room. "But I am finished. He finally crossed the line tonight. I want to come home." The line went silent, but it felt electric, charged with the immense power that her family name commanded across the globe. "Very well," Arthur Vance said, his tone instantly shifting to one of protective fury. "The company jet will be waiting for you at Teterboro at 8 a.m. I will clear your entire schedule for the next month." "Dad, one more thing," Mina said firmly. Aries Capital, Damien. He has been incredibly cruel to me. The silence on the line grew even heavier, filled with the promise of retribution. Cruel, Arthur repeated slowly. It was a final verdict. Do not worry about him. Mina, just focus on coming home. You just get yourself home. I will handle the rest of this personally. Mina hung up the phone, took a slow, steady breath, and walked back into the party like a queen returning to her throne. The next morning, Damien woke up with a pounding headache and an overwhelming, sinking sense of impending doom. The gala had been a total disaster, and the rumors about his financial troubles were already beginning to leak into the morning press. After Martin had delivered the terrible news, Damien had spiraled into a state of aggressive panic. He had consumed far too much whiskey and started a public, embarrassing fight with a rival Firm S owner, making himself look desperate and unstable. He stumbled into the cold, minimalist kitchen of their penthouse, his movements sluggish. That apartment had always been his choice, a status symbol that lacked any real warmth or soul, and he had forced her to live in it despite her objections. Mina had once dreamed of living in a cozy, historic brownstone, but he had laughed at her dreams as if they were childish. Mina was sitting at the kitchen island, sipping tea and reading the financial paper. She wore simple linen trousers and a crisp white shirt, looking perfectly serene. It infuriated him to see her so relaxed. "You look far too pleased with yourself this morning," he growled, grabbing the fridge door for support. "I am just reading the paper, Damien." She replied without even looking up from the headlines. "Reading the paper," he mocked, his voice rising in volume, "while my entire world is burning to the ground. Did you know that J.P. Morgan suspended our credit line at 6 this morning, and Goldman Sachs is reviewing our books as we speak? It is a coordinated attack," he yelled, slamming the refrigerator door shut with a loud bang. The Sterling deal was everything. It was supposed to put Aries Capital on the map permanently. Now it is dead because someone pulled the plug. Perhaps the deal was far too risky to begin with. "Damien," Mina said, turning a page of her paper calmly, "your debt-to-equity ratio was much too high." Damien stared at her, stunned by her sudden insight. "You actually looked at the numbers. What would you know about corporate debt? Your only concern is how much you spend at the store. I rarely shop there." "Damien," she said, her voice remaining perfectly steady. "That is precisely the problem," he roared, hitting the counter with his fist. "You do not understand how this works. Money is for show. A beautiful wife is supposed to look like a billionaire's trophy, not a librarian. You walk around in these plain rags." He gestured aggressively at her clothes, "looking like a broke student. You make me look weak to my peers." "You seem to be doing a fine job of that all on your own," she said, finally lowering the paper. Her eyes were cold and distant. He stepped back in shock. "What did you just say to me?" Mina stood up slowly. "Perhaps your partners have simply lost all faith in your leadership," she said. "Perhaps they finally see a man who is reckless and cares more about socialites than sound business practices." He stepped toward her, trying to intimidate her by backing her against the kitchen counter. "You think you are so smart now. You are absolutely nothing without me. I took you from that low-paying job. I gave you this," he said, gesturing wildly to the empty, cold penthouse. "I gave you the Blackwood name, and I can take it away just as easily. Is that a threat, Damien?" "It is a promise," he sneered. "Our prenup is ironclad. My top lawyers made sure of it. You annoy me. I am going to divorce you, and you will leave here with absolutely nothing. You will be back in some dusty, forgotten gallery, begging for work to pay your rent. Remember that." Mina looked at him, her face completely unreadable. "I will," she said softly. "I will remember that." "Good. Now get out. I have very important calls to make. My high-priced lawyers have already settled everything. You annoy me, Mina. You bore me to tears. I am divorcing you, and you will leave here with just the clothes. You brought nothing else. Not one single cent. You will be back in some dusty gallery, begging for work soon enough. Remember that." Mina stared at him, her expression a complete blank slate. "I will," she said quietly. "I will remember." "Good. Now get out. I have serious calls to make. I have to try and save my company from the mess you probably started at that party." Mina did not bother to argue with him. She took her teacup to the sink, poured the remaining liquid out, and walked calmly to the guest bedroom. She went inside and firmly locked the door behind her, leaving him to wallow in his own manufactured misery. Left alone, Damien frantically grabbed his phone to call his primary bankers. He needed to scream at someone, or perhaps beg for more time. He dialed his contact at the Carlyle Group, but it went straight to a cold voicemail box. Then he called Jape Morgan, but the assistant answered the line instead. "I am very sorry, Mr. Blackwood, but Mr. Harrison is in an all-day private meeting. He is completely unavailable to take your call." "Unavailable?" Damien roared into the phone. "I have a $1 billion credit line with that institution. Tell him to call me right now." He left very specific instructions not to be disturbed by anyone. "Sir, especially by you." The line went dead. Damien felt his blood run ice cold in his veins. "Especially by you." This was not a routine review. It was a calculated, total execution of his business. Shaking uncontrollably, he poured a large glass of whiskey, even though it was not yet 10 in the morning. The white marble of the expensive penthouse suddenly felt like a tomb. He had built his entire empire on massive, unchecked debt. He knew deep down that if one single card moved, the entire structure would collapse into nothingness. He had been so busy acting tough that he never once noticed his greatest weakness was standing right beside him the entire time. Inside her room, Mina was not packing her bags. She was sitting at a desk, engaged in a secure, encrypted video call. "The assets are being marshaled as we speak, Miss Vance," a stern man said from an expensive, mahogany-paneled office in Geneva. "We have begun acquiring Ares Capital S debt from the various banks. They were incredibly eager to sell it off. It seems Mr. Blackwood has quite a reputation for being difficult." "Good, Mr. Dubois," Mina replied. She was wearing a sharp, perfectly tailored blazer, looking every bit the heiress she was. "And the Sterling Aerospace deal. Your father handled that matter personally." Dubois smiled through the screen. "Vance Consolidated just acquired a controlling interest in Sterling this morning. We paid in full with cash. The deal Damien tried to leverage is entirely ours now. The official press release hits the wire at noon." Mina nodded, her expression satisfied. "He will be absolutely desperate for a financial lifeline by then. Make sure he finds absolutely none. I want every single bridge burned by the time my father arrives tomorrow. I want Ares Capital to be nothing but a hollow, worthless shell." "Understood, Miss Vance." "It is a true pleasure to have you back in the game." "It is good to be back," Mina said, then closed her laptop with a sharp snap. News of the Sterling acquisition broke at exactly noon. Vance Consolidated had bought them in a massive, surprise all-cash deal that stunned the market. Damien watched the headline crawl across his terminal in disbelief. His expensive whiskey glass shattered in his hand as he realized the truth. "Vance Consolidated," he whispered, as bright red blood dripped onto his desk. Vance Consolidated was not a firm you simply read about in the headlines. It was a ghost in the machine of global finance. Everyone in the high-stakes world of Manhattan recognized the name, yet they operated in a sphere of profound, disciplined silence. They were the epitome of old money, possessing a history that stretched back further than the skyscrapers themselves. Unlike the loud, aggressive players who thrived on hostile takeovers and flashy acquisitions, Vance owned the quiet infrastructure of the world. Shipping lanes, rare earth mines, and foundational patents were their game. They were the absolute bedrock of the economy, never bothering to engage with the frantic vultures like him. They were not just a company, they were the house itself. And tonight, the house had finally decided to reach out and crush his prize. His phone started ringing at dawn and had not stopped for 3 hours straight. "Damien, it is Martin," his chief financial officer stammered, his voice laced with pure, unadulterated terror. "The board is currently calling an emergency meeting, and I do not know how to tell you this, but Forbes just slashed your net worth to zero." The panic in his voice was palpable, a stark contrast to the usual composed, professional demeanor he maintained while managing their massive, increasingly volatile portfolio. "They are claiming we are completely insolvent, but we are not," Damien roared, his knuckles white as he wrapped a napkin around his bleeding hand where he had shattered his glass. We are if we cannot pay the staff. Damien, Martin replied, his voice breaking. Our accounts at Citibank have been frozen by federal order. Why would they do that? He demanded. They cited a complex contract clause tied to the Sterling deal failure. Martin finished. Click, another call came through, and his stomach plummeted. This is legal counsel for the Attorney General, a voice stated. We are opening an inquiry into your recent filings. We received a tip. Click, another call, Damien. It is Serafina, her voice was ice. I think it is best we stop seeing each other immediately, Serafina said, her tone devoid of the warmth he was used to. My father says you are a pariah in this city now. I am so sorry. Darling, but you are finished. The line went dead before he could even defend himself. He smashed his expensive smartphone against the office wall, watching the screen shatter into 1,000 jagged pieces. Cowards. Every single one of them was a coward. He was losing everything he had spent a decade building, and Vance Consolidated had systematically stolen the deal right out from under him, making him feel like an incompetent child. He needed someone to blame, someone to focus his blinding, white-hot rage upon. He stormed through the massive penthouse, shouting his wife's name, Mina, but the apartment was deathly silent. He kicked open the heavy oak door to her bedroom, expecting to find her cowering or perhaps hiding, but the room was empty. Her closet was bare, the hangers swinging uselessly. Her jewelry box was gone, leaving only dust behind. The only thing left on the nightstand was her wedding ring, a cold, simple object resting against the polished wood, mocking his sudden desperate isolation. A simple platinum band sat perfectly centered next to a copy of their signed prenuptial agreement. She left me, Damien said, his voice dropping to a stunned, hollow whisper. The absolute nerve of that woman. She saw the ship was sinking and was the first rat off the deck. He looked at the ring, feeling not heartbreak, but a surge of bitter resentment. He had given her everything, provided a lifestyle most women would kill for, and the moment the tide turned, she vanished without a single word of support or loyalty. He laughed, a harsh, jagged sound that echoed off the high ceilings of his lonely penthouse. Good, he muttered to himself. She gets absolutely nothing. He paced his office, his mind racing like a trapped animal. He was ruined. The Attorney General was sniffing around his books. His investors had vanished, and his wife had fled the moment things got difficult. No, this could not be the end. He was Damien Blackwood, a man who built empires from nothing. He would file for bankruptcy and restructure the entire mess. His private line rang, the one reserved for his biggest investors. He grabbed it. Hello, is this Mr. Blackwood? A polite, crisp British voice asked from the other end. Who is this? Damien snapped, his nerves completely frayed. My name is Julian Hayes, the voice replied smoothly. I represent the personal office of Arthur Vance. We would like to schedule a formal meeting for tomorrow at 9 a.m. Damien froze in place, his heart hammering against his ribs. Arthur Vance, the CEO of Vance Consolidated. That is correct, sir, Hayes confirmed. Mr. Vance is in New York and is interested in the transition of the Sterling assets. He thought it would be polite to meet the former bidder personally. It was a lifeline. Damien's mind spun with rapid calculations. They had crushed him, certainly. But maybe they wanted to buy Ares Capital and bring him into the fold as a partner. He was toxic to everyone else. But to a giant like Vance, a man of such immense resources, he could be a bargain. Yes, Damien said, his bravado instantly returning. 9 a.m. is perfect. I will have my team prepare a full presentation for him. Oh, that will not be necessary. Mr. Blackwood, the assistant replied, this will not be a presentation. Sir, it is a debriefing. Mr. Vance will bring his legal team to review the transition. Good day. The line went dead. Damien stood in the heavy, oppressive silence of his office. A debriefing. A cold, sharp suspicion began to creep into his mind. He looked around his empty, echoing penthouse, suddenly feeling very small. He thought of his wife, Mina. What was her maiden name? He had never really paid attention to such trivial details. His lawyers had checked her out, and they said she was clean. No family, no money, no connections. He scrambled to his desk, frantically tossing aside files to find their original marriage certificate. He found it buried under a stack of old gala invitations. Groom, Damien Michael Blackwood. Bride, Mina. Mina Vance. His heart stopped dead in his chest. "No," he whispered, staring at the name in disbelief. "It has to be a coincidence." But he knew, with a sinking, terrifying certainty, it was not. Mina was not just a librarian. Mina was a Vance. The realization hit him like a physical blow, leaving him gasping for air. He remembered her quiet confidence, her infuriatingly calm demeanor during his most chaotic business deals. He had dismissed her as a simple, uneducated librarian. He had married a shark that was about to eat him alive. The Ares Capital offices were usually a hive of manic energy, buzzing with traders and analysts. That morning, however, it felt like a tomb. Employees huddled in fearful groups, their computers dark, the atmosphere thick with impending doom. Damien had not slept a wink. His suit was rumpled, and his face was a mask of paranoid fury. He had spent the entire night trying to move funds to secret offshore accounts, but they were all frozen solid. He had frantically searched for Arthur Vance online, and the results deepened his growing terror. Arthur Vance was not just a billionaire. He was a kingmaker who owned the media companies that wrote the success lists. He moved governments. He was old money, permanent money, the kind of power that does not just influence events, but dictates the reality of the business world. And Damien had spent 3 years telling his daughter that her charity work was tacky. At 8:55, Damien was pacing his corner office. Watching the street below, his chief financial officer, Martin, sat on the leather sofa, nervously shredding a napkin into tiny pieces. "He is here to buy us, Martin." "He has to be," Damien said, trying to convince himself. "He will want me to run it. He will see my talent." "Damien, the Attorney General is downstairs," Martin said weakly, his face pale. "They are not asking to come up. They are just waiting in the lobby, with boxes. They are not here to negotiate," Damien insisted, his hands shaking uncontrollably as he adjusted his tie. "A man like Vance. One phone call and the authorities vanish. This is a test. He is testing my nerves." At 8:59, the private elevator chimed. His assistant, pale as a ghost, buzzed him. "Sir, he is here." The office doors slid open. It was not just one man. 5 of them walked in, moving with the synchronized precision of a military unit. 4 were high-powered attorneys, carrying thick, leather portfolios. In the center stood Arthur Vance. He was 60 tall, with striking silver hair. He wore a bespoke dark gray suit that likely cost more than Damien's entire car collection. His shoes were polished to a mirror shine. He wore no flashy watch, just a classic, understated timepiece. He radiated a quiet, terrifying power that made Damien's own loud. Fake charisma looked like a pathetic joke. "Mr. Blackwood," Arthur said. His voice was calm, but filled the massive room with a weight that felt suffocating. "Thanks for seeing us." Damien tried to stand tall, his hand outstretched. "Mr. Vance, a true honor, please. Sit." Arthur ignored the hand completely. He walked past him, standing by the panoramic windows overlooking Park Avenue. "Ares Capital Partners," Arthur said, his back turned to the room. "Ares, the god of war, how fitting. You have made quite a name for yourself. All smoke, mirrors, and noise. I call it growth, sir," Damien said, his smile feeling painfully thin. "Call it what you want," Arthur replied. Turning around, his eyes were cold and clear. They held no anger, which was somehow much worse. Total indifference. "I am not here to buy Mr. Blackwood. You seem to think you still have something to sell," Arthur remarked. Damien's blood turned to ice in his veins. "What, my company, your company?" A lawyer stepped forward. "Is in default on its primary loans to the big banks. That is just a liquidity issue." Damien stuttered, his confidence evaporating. "It is permanent," the lawyer said firmly. "As of 7 this morning, Vance Consolidated acquired every single bit of your debt. We bought your entire world, Mr. Blackwood, all $14.7 billion of it." Damien stumbled back, clinging to his desk for support. Martin let out a tiny choked sound and went rigid. "You bought my debt. You tried to buy Sterling Aerospace with money you did not have," Arthur said calmly. "I bought it for a steep discount with cash. Then, I used my pocket money to buy your entire, over-leveraged, toxic mess of a company. The banks were thrilled to dump you. They know exactly what the investigators are about to find on your private servers. You tipped them off," Damien cried, his voice breaking. "We did not have to," the second lawyer said. We provided the records from our own audit, since we are your new creditor, the lawyer continued coolly. The evidence of fraud and market manipulation is everywhere. You are a very sloppy bookkeeper, Mr. Blackwood. This is illegal, Damien shouted, his face turning red with rage. You cannot do this. We can, Arthur said, his voice dropping low, making the threat feel absolute. And we have. Your company is now a subsidiary of mine. Your board is gone. Your team, he glanced at Martin, is fired, effective immediately. Martin fainted, slumping to the floor. Neither man paid any mind to the unconscious man. Damien was gasping for air, his world collapsing. Why do this over Sterling? It is just business, I get it, but this is total destruction. Arthur walked slowly toward him, stopping just a foot away. For a fleeting second, pure, unadulterated contempt flashed across his face. You are loud and arrogant, Arthur said. I have departments that employ men far worse than you. I would not have crossed the street to spit on you. He leaned in, whispering like a sharp, cold blade. But you made one mistake. What? Damien whispered, a wave of sickening dread filling his chest. You disrespected my daughter, Arthur stated plainly. Damien stared, his mind finally connecting the dots. Mina Vance, Arthur confirmed, his eyes like glacial ice. My only child, my heir. The woman who will run this entire organization one day. She came to New York to escape the name. She wanted a simple life. Arthur shook his head, looking deeply disappointed at the man before him. And she found you, a hollow con man in a fancy suit. I loved her, Damien stammered, the lie tasting like bitter ash in his mouth. I did not know. That, Arthur said, is the most damning thing you could have said. You lived with her for 3 years and never really saw her. You saw an accessory to ignore. You humiliated her. My daughter, Arthur continued, is a genius. She graduated from Wharton and ran my Geneva branch under an alias for years. She grew our profits by 400%. She speaks 4 languages and analyzes a balance sheet better than your entire team combined. And you told her to talk to the wives during meetings. You threatened to leave her with nothing. Arthur smiled, a razor-thin, dangerous expression. The irony is absolutely exquisite. Damien's world shrunk to the small space between his desk and Arthur's bespoke suit. The sounds of the office faded out, leaving only the sound of his own heavy, panicked breathing. The prenuptial agreement, Damien whispered, clinging to the last shred of hope he had. It is ironclad. Vaughtel Lipton drafted it themselves, he said, gesturing to the lawyers who watched him with pity. She gets nothing. What she came with, that is the law, Arthur laughed. A dry, brutal sound, Mr. Blackwood. You are truly a fool. Please, he gestured to his lead counsel. Mr. Hayes, could you explain the terms you drafted 3 years ago? The lawyer stepped forward, looking entirely unimpressed. Indeed, Mr. Blackwood, you came to us wanting an ironclad agreement. You wanted to make sure that girl could never touch a single share of your company, and we were more than happy to oblige. You got exactly what you wanted, but not what you expected. The coldness in their eyes was far worse than any shouted argument or heated outburst. It was pure, absolute indifference, the kind you feel for a bug you are about to crush. I am not here to buy, Mr. Blackwood, Arthur said, his voice level and steady. You seem to think you still have something to sell, but you are mistaken. Damien felt his blood turn to ice as the reality of the situation began to set in. What are you talking about? My company. A lawyer stepped forward, adjusting his tie with practiced ease. Your company, Mr. Blackwood, is currently in total default on its primary loans to the major banks. That is just a minor liquidity issue. Damien stuttered, his hands trembling as he reached for the edge of his mahogany desk. It is not minor, and it is certainly not temporary. The lawyer countered without emotion. As of 7 o'clock this morning, Vance Consolidated has officially acquired every single bit of your outstanding debt. We bought your entire world, Mr. Blackwood, every single asset, every contract, every secret, all $14.7 billion of it. Damien stumbled backward, his knees hitting the leather chair, clutching the desk as the room began to spin around him while the gravity of the total collapse sank in. Martin let out a tiny choked sound, his face draining of all color as he processed the news. You bought my debt, Damien managed to ask. his voice barely a whisper in the silent office. "You tried to buy Sterling Aerospace with money you did not actually have," Arthur said, his tone infuriatingly calm. "I bought it for a significant discount with cold, hard cash then. I simply used some of my pocket money to acquire your entire, over-leveraged, and frankly toxic mess of a company. It was an easy decision, really. The market was already pricing in your failure, and I was happy to oblige by speeding up the process. The banks were absolutely thrilled to dump you," Arthur continued, pacing the length of the office. "They know exactly what the federal investigators are about to find on your servers, and they wanted no part of the fallout. You tipped them off, didn't you?" Damien cried, his voice breaking under the weight of his mounting panic. "We did not have to," the second lawyer said, looking at a stack of documents. "We provided the records from our own internal audit. Since we are now your primary creditor, the authorities are already on their way, and there is nowhere left for you to hide." "Damien, the paper trail you left behind is undeniable. The evidence of massive corporate fraud and blatant market manipulation is everywhere. You are a very sloppy bookkeeper." "Mr. Blackwood, this is illegal," Damien shouted, his face reddening with a mix of fury and terror. "You cannot just do this to me." "We certainly can," Arthur said, his voice dropping low and dangerous. "And we have. Your company is now a subsidiary of mine, and everything you built is gone. You are officially under my control. I suggest you sit down and stop making a scene, because the reality is that your career is over, and the people who trusted you are going to realize exactly who you are. Your board of directors is gone, effective immediately. Your entire management team," he glanced briefly at Martin, "is fired. Please escort him out of the building." Martin fainted, slumping to the floor in a pathetic heap as his legs gave out. Neither man paid him any mind, treating his collapse as a minor inconvenience. Damien was gasping for air, clutching his chest. "Why do this over Sterling Aerospace? It is just business, right? You did not have to destroy everything. It is just a minor acquisition in the grand scheme of things. So why go to such extreme lengths to ruin my life and my reputation? I get that you see it as just business, but to me this is a total destruction," Arthur replied. He walked slowly toward Damien, stopping just a foot away, invading his personal space. For a fleeting second, pure, unadulterated contempt flashed across his face. "You are loud, you are arrogant, and you are entirely incompetent. I have various departments in my own firm that employ men far worse than you, and even they have enough sense to maintain some level of professional integrity. You are a small petty man who thinks he is a titan, but in reality, you are nothing more than a passing nuisance. I would not have crossed the street to spit on you, let alone orchestrate a hostile takeover." Arthur spat. He leaned in, whispering like a sharp, cold blade against Damien's neck. "But you made one single mistake." "What?" Damien whispered, a crushing sense of dread filling his chest as he realized he had finally pushed someone too far. "You disrespected my daughter," Arthur said, his eyes darkening with sudden intensity. Damien stared, his mind racing as he finally started to connect the dots between the past 3 years and this very moment. The connection suddenly clicked, and he felt his stomach drop. Mina Vance," Arthur confirmed, his eyes cold as ice. "My only child, my heir. The woman who will run this entire global organization one day. She came to New York to escape the weight of the family name. She wanted a simple life, a chance to be herself without people looking for handouts." Arthur shook his head, looking deeply disappointed in the world. "She thought she found someone real, someone who loved her for who she was, not for who her father happened to be. She trusted you with her heart, and you treated her like an object to be used. And she found you, a hollow con man in a fancy suit." "I loved her," Damien stammered, the lie tasting like bitter ash in his mouth. "I did not know who she was." "That," Arthur said, "is the most damning thing you could have possibly said to me. You lived with her for 3 years. You shared a home, you shared a life, and you never really saw her. You never bothered to look past the surface because you were too busy staring into the mirror. You are even more pathetic than I originally thought. A man who cannot see the value of what is right in front of him deserves to lose it all." You saw an accessory to ignore. You humiliated her in public and in private. My daughter, Arthur continued, his voice steady but laced with barely contained rage, is a genius. She graduated from Wharton at the top of her class and ran my Geneva branch under an alias for years. She grew our yearly profits by 400% while you were busy trying to pad your own ego with worthless deals. She handled crises that would have caused you to break down in tears, and she did it all without asking for credit. She is a woman of substance, and you are a shell of a man. She speaks 4 languages fluently and analyzes a balance sheet better than your entire senior team combined. And you told her to talk to the wives during meetings. You threatened to leave her with nothing, thinking that your money was the only thing holding her in place. Arthur smiled. A razor-thin, terrifying expression. The irony is absolutely exquisite. You thought you were the one holding all the power, that you were the master of the house, while she was simply observing your every failure, documenting your every lie, and waiting for me to step in. Damien's world shrunk until it was just the empty, suffocating space between his desk and Arthur's perfectly tailored suit. The sounds of the busy office outside faded out, replaced by a deafening, rhythmic pulsing in his ears. The prenuptial agreement, Damien whispered, clinging to that final shred of hope like a drowning man clutching at a piece of driftwood. It is ironclad. We signed it before we were even married, and it protects my personal assets completely. You cannot touch a dime of my money, no matter what you have done to the company today. Wachtell Lipton drafted it themselves, he said, gesturing to the lawyers who watched him with nothing but cold pity. She gets absolutely nothing. What she came with, she leaves with. Arthur laughed, a dry, brutal sound that echoed off the high ceilings of the office. Mr. Blackwood, you are truly a fool. You think a piece of paper can stop me. Please, he gestured to his lead counsel. Mr. Hayes, could you please explain the exact terms you drafted 3 years ago for this man? It seems he has forgotten the fine print. Mr. Hayes stepped forward, clutching a leather-bound folder. Indeed, Mr. Blackwood, you came to us 3 years ago wanting an ironclad, airtight agreement. You were paranoid, desperate to ensure that the girl you were marrying could never, under any circumstances, touch a single share of your company. You wanted protection from her, and we provided exactly what you asked for. But you failed to read the clauses regarding fiduciary responsibility and the underlying legal entities that actually hold the assets. You signed away the power to control your own destiny the day you put that pen to paper. Exactly, Damien said, his voice straining with a flicker of desperate hope. She cannot touch Ares. We drafted the documents to prevent this specific outcome. Right, Mr. Hayes, the lead counsel, continued with a steady, unflappable rhythm. The marital agreement is explicit, he stated. It dictates that in the event of a divorce, each party retains sole ownership of their respective assets, including any holdings derived from family trusts or inheritances. All joint property, on the other hand, is split 50-50. So, let me get this straight, Damien said, his brow furrowing as he paced. I keep Ares Capital, and she walks away with half the penthouse. That is the deal, Mr. Blackwood. Please listen, the lawyer interrupted, his tone sharp. You brought Ares Capital, a debt-ridden, fraudulent mess, into this marriage. It is not an asset, it is a liability. It is worth billions, Damien snapped back, clutching at straws. Arthur, sitting across from him, finally cut in. It was worth billions, Damien. Now it is a liability, a sprawling criminal case. And by the terms of your own agreement, you keep it all, every lawsuit, every debt, every legal catastrophe. Damien's face drained of color, his jaw going slack. Mr. Hayes continued. Miss Mina Vance brought entirely separate assets into this union. She had nothing, Damien stammered, his hands shaking. No, Mr. Hayes corrected coolly. She was the sole beneficiary of the Vance Family Trust established in 1923. At the moment of your wedding, her personal liquid net worth was approximately $9.4 billion. Damien felt his legs give out beneath him, the heavy weight of the truth crushing his bravado in an instant. He slumped into his leather chair, staring blankly at the wall. But what about the gallery? She was bored, Arthur explained, his expression unreadable. She wanted to be near the art world, The owner is her godfather. He paid her a salary just so she could feel a semblance of normalcy. That gown she wore to the gala, a one-of-a-kind archival piece. That diamond ring, a flawless blue stone. You mistook her silence for simplicity and her quiet demeanor for poverty. You are a truly vulgar man, Damien. So she is wealthy. Yes, the woman you ignored for years is one of the richest people on earth, and by your own prenuptial agreement, you get nothing. You keep only what is yours, Mr. Hayes added, and as of 9:05 this morning, that total is absolutely nothing. The reality landed like a physical blow to his chest. He was not just losing his company. He was being left with the absolute ruins of his life, while the woman he had mocked walked away with every advantage. But the penthouse, he stammered, his voice rising in panic. I can sell it. Look, half is surely mine. Right. Mr. Hayes ignored the plea and pulled a final, heavy document from his leather folder. Regarding that, as your primary creditor, Vance Consolidated has officially placed a lien on every asset you own as collateral for your massive corporate debt. This apartment, your private jet, the luxury cars, the art collection. It is all seized, the lawyer said. You get half the equity only after we liquidate everything to pay your outstanding debts. The lawyer allowed himself a thin smile. Given your history of fraud, I suspect your share will be, let us calculate, roughly zero. Arthur Vance checked his gold Patek Philippe watch with practiced indifference. Our work here is done, he announced. Gentlemen, secure the premises. The district attorney is ready to handle the criminal side of this. Lawyers moved quickly to seize Damien's computer and the still unconscious Martin. Wait, Damien shrieked, lunging forward in a desperate, pathetic attempt to intervene. Please, Arthur, I apologize. I will do anything. I will beg, he pleaded, his composure completely shattered. I love her. I really do. I did not mean for any of this to happen. He fell to his knees, clawing at Arthur's custom suit. Arthur looked down, his face a cold mask of pure disgust. He pulled his fabric away from Damien's grasping hands. You are right about one thing, Blackwood. You will beg, Arthur stated, but not to me, and certainly not to my daughter. He nodded toward the heavy office door. Two large, serious men in black suits stepped into the room. They were not corporate lawyers. Mr. Blackwood is trespassing, Arthur said calmly. Please escort him off my property immediately. He leaves with only what he has on him. No more, Arthur added. No, Damien screamed, scrambling backward across the floor. This is my office, my entire life. Mina, you cannot do this to me. Security guards grabbed him by the arms, lifting him like he weighed nothing. You will hear from my lawyers. Damien shrieked as they dragged him across the polished marble floor. They will be speaking to ours, Arthur Vance replied, turning his back without another glance, and likely the United States Attorney as well. As Damien was dragged past his assistant through the silent office, the elevator doors slid open with a soft chime. Standing inside, flanked by her own security detail, was Mina. She was not the quiet, invisible wife from the gala anymore. She wore a razor-sharp white Chanel power suit that looked like armor. Her hair was pulled back in a severe, elegant style. Her eyes as cold and gray as her father's met Damien's. She looked absolutely terrifying. Mina, he cried, his voice breaking. Baby, please stop this madness. It is a mistake. I love you. Tell them I love you, he pleaded. Mina looked at the man held firmly by two guards. His face was streaked with desperate tears, his suit a rumpled, pathetic mess. She said nothing at all. She just held his gaze, her expression completely blank. She walked past him toward her new office as the doors closed, effectively locking Damien out of his former life. Mina Vance walked onto the 49th floor with total confidence. The remaining employees, those not involved in the massive fraud, stood frozen at their desks. She walked to the head of the silent room, her father following close behind her to ensure the transition went smoothly. She stood on the platform Damien once used for his aggressive, bullying speeches. Good morning, Mina said, her voice crisp, clear, and perfectly professional. The voice of a true leader. My name is Mina Vance. As of 9 a.m. this morning, I am the acting CEO of this firm. Ares Capital is officially dissolved. Its name, its reputation, and its toxic business practices are finished for good. She paused, letting the weight of the moment sink in. Vance Consolidated is not about hostile leverage or deception. We are here to build real value in the market. We acquired this firm to salvage what matters for the shareholders and the staff. She scanned the room, meeting the terrified faces of the employees. Most of you are victims of Damien's ego and his greed. You have two clear choices today. Pack your desks and leave with a full severance package. It will be fair, I promise, she said, leaning forward. Or you can choose to stay. We are forming a new division, Vance Strategic Opportunities. It is built on real analytics and zero tolerance for the behavior that destroyed this place. You will work harder than ever before, and the standards will be much higher. But you will finally build something that actually lasts. She watched them closely. The government is currently investigating everything. Anyone involved in Damien's criminal activities will face them directly. We do not protect criminals, she stated firmly. However, she added, anyone who comes forward today with evidence for our internal audit will receive full immunity and our recommendation for leniency. We value honesty, even in these difficult circumstances. Seconds later, a junior partner raised his hand, looking pale and nervous. Ms. Vance, I have a hard drive, he offered. Damien had a secret ledger, and I can unlock it. Mina nodded to her lawyer. Mr. Hayes, please take Mr. Miller's statement. He is the first to do the right thing, and he will be remembered for that, she promised. A wave of visible relief moved through the room. Suddenly, 3 more hands went up. The wall of loyalty had broken completely. Mina had replaced Damien's pathetic cult of personality with something much better, genuine competence and integrity. Arthur Vance watched the scene, a rare faint smile of pride on his face. He came here intending to destroy a company. His daughter just saved it instead. Meanwhile, Damien was thrown out of the front lobby onto the hard sidewalk of Park Avenue. The guards tossed his briefcase onto the pavement after him. Without a second thought, it burst open upon impact, scattering papers into the afternoon wind. He was on his knees, gasping, when the first flashbulbs went off in his face. Mr. Blackwood is Ares insolvent. Damien, what is your comment on the acquisition? Is it true your wife is Arthur Vance's daughter? Reporters descended on him like vultures. He was trapped by the press. He tried to stand with some semblance of dignity, but he was a total wreck. His suit was torn, his hand was bloody, and panic took over his mind. No comment. Get away from me, he stammered. Trying to push through the crowd, he stumbled down the busy street, a pathetic, hunted man. He reached for his phone to call a private car, but then remembered it was shattered during the confrontation. He fumbled for his wallet instead. He had his black card. He tried to hail a passing taxi. Take me to the Carlisle, he told the driver, his voice trembling. The driver checked the card reader. Sorry, pal, the driver said. Card declined. Damien stared at the machine in disbelief. Declined. That is impossible. Run it again. I did, buddy. Account frozen. You got cash. Damien had exactly $23 left in his wallet. His mind began to collapse entirely. The extent of his ruin was truly total. They had taken every single cent. His credit, his cars, his home. Everything was gone. Get out, pal, the driver said, pulling away. Damien Blackwood, the former Wall Street shark, was kicked out of a taxi for being unable to pay. He stood on the sidewalk with $23 as the city that once worshipped him rushed past, completely indifferent to his fall. 6 weeks later, the Wall Street Journal featured a major front-page story titled, The Vance Here, How Mina Vance is Forging an Empire from the Ashes. The article was a masterclass in professional rebranding. It detailed Mina's brilliant, overlooked career in Geneva and her surgical, precise takeover of her husband's fraudulent firm. She was the silent shark, the genius heiress who had played the role of the humble wife. Inside the new offices, now redesigned with warm woods and soft lighting, Mina ran her first quarterly review. The conference room was packed with eager, talented employees. John Miller, who provided the crucial hard drive, was now the head of risk management. Our projections are stable and growing, Mina said, her voice confident and measured. We have cleared 90% of the toxic assets left by Damien. Our new energy fund is already oversubscribed. We are finally building something real. We are done gambling with other people's money, she declared. The team applauded loudly. It was not the fearful, forced applause Damien once demanded. It was genuine, earned respect. After the meeting, Mina walked to her corner office. It was the same room, but she had replaced the cold, imposing furniture with comfortable sofas, books, and art from her father's collection. Her father was waiting, looking out the same window he stood at when he destroyed Damien. "You are enjoying this, are you not?" Arthur said. It was not a question. "I am enjoying the work," Mina corrected, pouring 2 cups of coffee. Damien was right about one thing, at least. I was bored. I missed the game. You were always better at it than I was, though. Arthur took the cup from her hand. "I am a builder," he said. You are a strategist. You see the whole board." "I learned by watching him," Mina said, her gaze distant. "He was sloppy and arrogant. He thought since I was his wife, I was his subordinate. He never knew I was actually his auditor all along." "Of what? Him?" Arthur asked, his voice careful and curious. Mina tensed, thinking of the past. "Damien. His criminal trial starts next month. The SEC and the SDNY are lining up for their turn. Mr. Miller provided a secret ledger that is truly devastating to his defense. He faces at least 20 years in prison. He will be lucky if he ever sees a golf course again," she added. His mistress, Serafina, is now a witness for the prosecution. Damien blew her father's private funds on foolish shell games and bad bets. Mina was furious at the waste. Arthur nodded slowly. "Justice served." "No, not justice," Mina said softly, looking out at the skyline. "Just business." She gazed at the city, having spent years trapped in a fake, golden life, finally free to be the person she was meant to be all along. Now she was finally truly herself again. It felt like shedding a heavy, suffocating skin. She had technically lost a husband, but the truth was that he was a man she never really had in the first place. And in that loss she finally regained her soul. Damien Blackwood's public downfall did not end in the courtroom. Just 2 days later, at a secondary hearing, he was forced to sell his prized $50,000 watch just to scrape together enough cash to pay his defense attorney. His lawyer was a nobody, a public defender who clearly did not have a plan. Damien sat there in the chair, looking thin, hollow, and wearing a cheap suit that hung off his frame. He looked like a living ghost. As the guards moved to pull him away, a reporter lunged toward him. "Damien, one question. After losing it all, what do you tell your wife?" He stopped, the fluorescent lights reflecting in his eyes, and stared directly into the camera lens with a hollow, haunted expression. The arrogance that had once defined him was completely gone. Only a desperate, broken wreck remained behind. He knew deep down that she was watching this moment unfold. "Mina," he whispered, his voice cracking under the pressure of the room. "I am sorry, I just did not know." The camera zoomed in tight on his pathetic, shattered face. He really did not know. Back in her office, high above the city streets, Mina watched the clip, her face completely unreadable. Her father stood behind her, watching the screen with a calculated look. "Do you believe him, even now?" Arthur asked his daughter. Mina watched the man who had constantly belittled her, treated her like furniture, and dismissed her intellect. She closed the video player with a sharp, final click of her mouse. "It does not matter," Mina Vance said, already turning back to her work. "He is irrelevant." A full year passed, and the world moved on quickly without him. The name Damien Blackwood became the biggest punchline on Wall Street, a shorthand for a catastrophic and total fall from grace. He was eventually found guilty on 14 separate counts of high-level fraud and racketeering. His own secret ledger, which he had foolishly kept, gave him away completely. He was now serving 25 years at a federal prison in Otisville, far from the life of luxury he had tried so hard to build on nothing but lies and empty, hollow promises. No visitors came to see him. His former friends vanished into thin air the moment his bank accounts were frozen. His own family disowned him out of pure, deep-seated shame, just like his ironclad prenuptial agreement dictated. He ended up with absolutely nothing to his name. Meanwhile, the Vance Strategic Opportunities Fund, now firmly under Mina's sharp direction, became a total powerhouse in New York. She had not just cleaned house. She had reinvented the entire business model. She rebuilt it on a foundation of solid steel. She was ruthless, brilliant, and entirely fair to those who deserved it. For the first time in her adult life, she felt truly content with where she stood. Her divorce had been finalized 6 months earlier. The hearing itself took barely 15 minutes to resolve. She kept her entire multi-billion-dollar trust, just as the original agreement stated, and walked out of that courthouse feeling lighter than she had in years. He was left with his massive multi-billion-dollar debt, a mountain of financial liability now owed directly to the federal government. Mina moved out of that cold, lonely marble penthouse they used to share. She bought a charming, cozy brownstone in the West Village, filled with towers of books and real, palpable warmth. She even started dating a literature professor from Columbia University, a man who appreciated the quiet life, a man who actually knew her, truly impressed by her deep love of classic poetry rather than just her massive portfolio. One afternoon, her assistant buzzed the line, "Miss Vance, there is a letter here from Otisville." Mina paused, her hand hovering over a report. "Send it in." The letter arrived on thin, cheap, yellowed prison paper that felt completely out of place in her sophisticated, high-end office environment. The handwriting was shaky, uneven, and surprisingly childlike. "Mina, I do not know if you will even read this," he wrote. "They say I need to show remorse for a chance at parole in 15 years. I do not even know what that is. I am just cold and scared every single day. I remember that day at the gallery. Years ago, you were so quiet. You wore a simple yellow dress. I thought for a moment that you were real. I thought you were the only good thing I had ever managed to hold on to. I was the fake one, the fraud. I see it clearly now. I was so busy playing the role of a billionaire that I never actually asked who you were or what you wanted. I ignored you because I was a coward, plain and simple. I was terrified you would look closer and see that I was completely empty inside. Just a kid from nowhere with a loud, obnoxious mouth. And you did see it, did you not? I do not want your money. I do not want your forgiveness, because I do not deserve it. I just need to know. That woman in the yellow dress, was any of it real to you? Or was it all just a game? Damien." Mina read the letter twice. A faint, lingering ache stayed in her chest. Not for him, but for the man he failed to become, and for the wasted time, for the simple, honest life they both faked for so long. She picked up a fountain pen, grabbed her own heavy, cream-colored stationery, and wrote just 2 words. She sealed the envelope with a sense of finality and handed it to her assistant to be mailed out. A week later, Damien received the reply in the noisy prison mailroom. His hands shook as he tore it open, his heart pounding against his ribs. He unfolded the heavy paper, his breath catching in his throat. It simply said. Damien sat on his cold, narrow cot, staring at the words until they blurred. It was real, the quiet life, the gentle smiles, the shared hope. It had all been real, and he, in his blind arrogance, had personally and methodically destroyed the only genuine thing he had ever possessed in his entire lonely life. He had been given the one authentic thing he owned, but he ground it to dust because he was too arrogant to see its true value. That realization, he understood, was his true eternal prison. The 25-year sentence was just a physical consequence of his crimes. Mina, back at her peaceful brownstone, poured a glass of wine and watched the evening snow fall against the glass. Her phone buzzed on the counter. It was her father, just landed. "Sweetheart," Arthur boomed over the line, "ready for dinner. I booked our favorite spot." "I am ready, Dad," Mina said, smiling for real. "I will be right there." She grabbed her coat, locked the door, and walked out into the night. She was no longer an ignored wife, but a queen in total control of her own destiny. Damien Blackwood learned the hardest lesson of all, the heavy price of ignorance. He thought his wife was just a decorative accessory, but she was the auditor of his life. He thought his prenup was a shield, but it was really a self-destruct button he pressed himself. He ignored the only person who truly saw him, and lost everything to his own ego. Mina did not just take his company, she reclaimed her identity, proving that true power is not the noise you make in the world, but the silence you keep for yourself. What did you think of Mina's revenge? Was it true justice or just cold, calculating business? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for watching. If you love this story of karma and redemption, please hit the like button. Share it with a friend who loves good drama. And make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss another story from our channel.